At precisely midnight, while the nation slept and the ancient corridors of Buckingham Palace lay in silence, King Charles III set his signature upon an order that would irrevocably reshape Meghan Markle's position within royal history. There was no ceremony, no public declaration, and no final plea for reconciliation. With a single deliberate stroke of the pen, the sovereign commanded the revocation of every remaining royal title associated with her name, drawing to a close a chapter that had tested the resilience of the monarchy for years. Charles remained seated for some time afterward, the weight of the document before him. A senior constitutional advisor stood nearby, the sealed order resting between them, yet neither man spoke hastily. The directive carried the full authority of the Crown, instructing all palace departments to excise Meghan's titles from official records and future usage. It was clinical in its precision, immediate in its effect, and offered no avenue for appeal. The king read the concluding paragraph once, then again, as if seeking some mitigation in repetition. None came. His expression hardened into resolve forged through prolonged reflection. In the quiet aftermath of that midnight signature, King Charles III sat motionless, the gravity of his decision settling upon him like the weight of centuries of royal precedent. The advisor remained a silent witness, aware that this was no impulsive act, but the culmination of years marked by careful deliberation and mounting institutional pressure. Charles understood profoundly that while the order formally diminished Meghan Markle's public standing, its true impact would reverberate through personal relationships, particularly with his younger son. He foresaw Harry interpreting the revocation as a direct judgment against the woman he had chosen to build his life with, a perception that transformed necessary constitutional clarity into something far more emotionally charged. The victory for the monarchy felt incomplete, overshadowed by the personal cost to a father who had long hoped for reconciliation. In that solitary moment, Charles reflected on the delicate balance monarchs must maintain between safeguarding the institution's dignity and preserving familial bonds, a tension that had defined much of his own reign and now reached a decisive point. The coded confirmation reached an aide who promptly contacted Prince William, the future king answering with the composure expected of his position, yet unprepared for the finality conveyed. The conversation was brief but carried profound implications no formal briefing could fully soften. Before the broader palace apparatus could frame the narrative for public consumption, those at the center of the decision confronted its human dimensions. The document itself appeared administrative and detached, yet it embodied the complex interplay of loyalty, unresolved resentments, and deep-seated pain binding Charles, Harry, and Meghan. From Charles's perspective, the monarchy faced gradual erosion through ambiguity and selective invocation of royal status. Harry viewed the matter through the lens of protecting his wife's honor and their shared future. Meghan experienced the loss of symbolic ties to an identity she had once embraced. This decree transcended bureaucracy, representing a profound familial wound articulated through the language of sovereign authority. Harry stood motionless in the dimly lit room, the phone pressed firmly against his ear as his brother William delivered the news with the measured precision of someone who understood the gravity of every word. The future king outlined the terms exactly as the sovereign had approved them, leaving no ambiguity about the decree's finality. A royal directive, issued under the full authority of the monarch, had stripped away Meghan's remaining official styles from all palace usage. There would be no phased implementation, no symbolic gestures of delay, and certainly no space for private reinterpretation or negotiation. Meghan watched her husband closely, noting the subtle tightening of his jaw and the way his posture stiffened. She chose not to interrupt, allowing the weight of the moment to settle without immediate demands for elaboration. When Harry finally lowered the phone and confirmed that the decision was complete and irreversible, Meghan turned her gaze away for a long moment. She absorbed the loss with a profound stillness that carried more quiet intensity than any outburst could convey. Though the titles had not conferred active royal duties for some time, they had continued to represent a tangible link to history, status, and the life she had stepped into with hope and determination. Their removal signified something deeper than administrative housekeeping. It represented the palace actively redrawing the boundaries of belonging, signaling a formal distancing that carried both symbolic and emotional consequences. For Harry, the call crystallized years of mounting tension into a single, unavoidable reality. Charles remained in his private study long after the signature had dried, the burden of guilt pressing upon him despite the clarity of his constitutional reasoning. He knew with certainty that his younger son would experience the order not as prudent separation, but as personal punishment directed at the woman Harry had chosen to defend. defend above all else. Across the desk, the weight of paternal responsibility felt heavier than the crown itself. William, still connected on the line, expressed his support for establishing unambiguous boundaries, recognizing that the monarchy's future authority could not rest upon endless personal exceptions. Yet even he voiced concern that Harry might interpret the action as calculated humiliation rather than necessary correction. The future king chose his subsequent words with care, warning that the public announcement would follow within hours. Harry's response was brief, consisting of one pointed question: whether his father had truly signed the document with his own hand. In another wing of the palace, Camilla found Charles alone and posed a similar inquiry in gentler terms, asking directly whether he was prepared to lose his son completely over this decision. The king did not answer immediately. When he finally spoke, he acknowledged the very real possibility that the order might sever what little remained of their relationship. Public criticism and media pressure had not been the deciding factors. Rather, something specific Meghan had done during a recent private royal occasion had crossed a threshold, making continued ambiguity untenable. Within the meticulously preserved palace archives rested the detailed record of the precise moment when accumulated tensions finally crystallized into irreversible action. For many months, the institution had demonstrated considerable restraint, absorbing a series of uncomfortable interviews, disputed public statements, and carefully calibrated challenges to royal protocol without resorting to such a dramatic constitutional response. The true catalyst unfolded during a private memorial ceremony held at St. George's Chapel, an occasion originally intended to foster unity and shared remembrance among the family. Instead, it exposed divisions so profound and visible that they could no longer be disguised or deferred. One particular conversation in the immediate aftermath of the service proved decisive, convincing King Charles that Meghan's ongoing connection to the royal sphere had moved beyond the realm of manageable complexity into something fundamentally at odds with the monarchy's essential requirements and public responsibilities. The pressures leading to this point had been building methodically over time. Repeated disagreements concerning the appropriate use of royal titles in public and commercial contexts, questions surrounding branding initiatives, differing expectations regarding security provisions, and broader debates about whether she could legitimately speak with any implied royal authority during international engagements. A royal title represented far more than a ceremonial honor or social distinction. It carried an implicit and enduring association with the crown itself, influencing how foreign governments, charitable organizations, and global audiences interpreted statements, actions, and initiatives. Charles had deliberately delayed firm intervention for an extended period, conscious that any decisive step might be widely interpreted as personal retaliation against his son's family choices rather than necessary institutional protection. The events surrounding the memorial service eliminated that final margin of hesitation, establishing a clear point of no return in the king's assessment. In the wake of the memorial service, Meghan directly confronted a senior palace official regarding her exclusion from the formal family procession, an element of royal ceremonial tradition that carried deep significance. Processional placement had long served as a visible marker of rank, official duty, and recognized position within the royal hierarchy. Meghan maintained that her title entitled her to a permanent place within such ceremonial frameworks, irrespective of her current non-working royal status. Her voice remained composed and controlled throughout the exchange, yet the underlying assertion was unmistakable and firm. Princess Anne, who happened to be within earshot, stepped forward with her characteristic blend of directness and calm authority. She informed Meghan clearly that no title, regardless of its historical weight, could override the sovereign's explicit instructions or established protocols. Anne did not need to raise her voice or engage in dramatic confrontation. Her measured presence and reputation for straightforwardness carried sufficient weight. Meghan responded by suggesting that history could not be conveniently rewritten or set aside simply because certain quarters within the palace found her presence or role uncomfortable. Anne held her gaze steadily and delivered a pointed warning. Continued efforts to leverage royal status in this manner would ultimately force the king to address and settle the matter in a permanent, unambiguous, and likely more severe fashion. This confrontation prompted Meghan to issue a subsequent formal written demand, requesting guaranteed formal recognition at future state and family events, while insisting that her historical standing could not be diminished or overridden by internal preferences or personal discomfort. Charles reviewed the document in private the following morning. He carefully underlined a specific sentence asserting that the palace lacked authority to erase or diminish her royal position, set the page aside without immediate comment, and ordered a comprehensive legal review. That review ultimately identified the narrow but viable constitutional pathway leading toward complete revocation of the remaining styles. With the legal review having provided the necessary constitutional clarity, King Charles III reached the solemn conclusion that he must summon his younger son, Prince Harry, to Windsor Castle for one final, intensely private confrontation before he would commit his signature to the irrevocable order. The meeting was arranged with deliberate secrecy. No advisors were allowed to attend. No secretaries took notes. No aides lingered nearby. It was to be a raw encounter between father and son, with only a single folder resting on the table between them, containing the full authority and weight of the crown. Harry arrived at the summons still clinging to the hope that some avenue for negotiation, compromise, or last-minute reconsideration might remain open. Charles, however, had already exhausted every possible alternative, reviewed every legal nuance, and weighed every potential consequence. When the king finally slid the folder across the table, neither man moved to open it immediately. The silence that followed was heavier and more revealing than any accusation either might have leveled. Harry sat rigidly, the locked door cutting them off completely from external counsel or prepared defenses. Charles spoke with measured deliberation, explaining that Meghan's remaining titles could no longer exist in isolation from the responsibilities, constraints, and public expectations traditionally attached to royal status. These responsibilities included firm limitations on public conduct, commercial ventures, and any implication that private decisions still carried the weight of official royal approval. The monarch emphasized that this matter transcended a mere family disagreement. If royal identity could be retained without corresponding duty and accountability, the crown's authority risked being selectively appropriated without adherence to its foundational rules and principles, setting a dangerous precedent for future generations. Tension in the room escalated rapidly as Harry pushed his chair back with audible force. He accused his father of converting what should have remained a deeply personal matter into a form of calculated public punishment, warning that the order would expose Meghan to worldwide humiliation and lasting judgment. He reminded Charles that she had already sacrificed considerably security, official position, and much of the institutional goodwill once extended to her. Despite these concessions, the palace seemed determined to extract one final symbolic act of submission. Harry's anger filled the confined space, yet Charles refused to respond in kind with matching emotional intensity. Instead, the king answered with quiet conviction, stating that the monarchy could not allow royal identity to be invoked only when it offered influence, access, or protection, while disregarding the obligations that came with it. Though he firmly denied revenge as a motive, the strain and personal pain evident in his voice betrayed how profoundly the situation had affected him both as sovereign and as a father. Harry leaned forward and asked pointedly whether the true target was Meghan, or whether this represented punishment for his own decision to step away from royal duties. Charles regarded his son for several long moments before admitting that Harry's departure had fundamentally altered the family dynamics, though not necessarily in the way his son perceived. The monarch then offered one last alternative: voluntary relinquishment of the titles, which would allow the announcement to be presented as a mutual and dignified resolution rather than an imposed decree. Harry rejected the proposal outright, viewing it as little more than a forced surrender masked in the language of grace. Charles removed his spectacles and rubbed his eyes wearily, acknowledging that refusal left no remaining options. His words carried the heavy resonance of reluctant finality rather than any sense of victory. As the tense meeting drew to its conclusion and Harry rose to leave, he paused at the locked door with his hand pressed firmly against it. In a voice heavy with emotion, he asked one final piercing question that cut to the heart of their fractured relationship: whether his father was truly willing to place the needs and preservation of the crown above the welfare of his own child. Charles offered no immediate verbal response. The weight of that question hung in the air between them, more powerful than any argument previously exchanged. It encapsulated years of accumulated pain, misunderstanding, and diverging paths. Yet the king's decision had not been made in complete solitude. Behind the midnight signature stood a network of careful counsel and preparation. Prince William had pressed for clarity to safeguard the monarchy's future authority. Princess Anne had demanded consistency in how rules were applied across the family. Senior constitutional advisors had thoroughly mapped potential consequences long before the document reached the sovereign's desk. This was not the outcome of cold bureaucratic conspiracy, but the considered judgment of a weary monarch who had been advised advised by those closest to him that further hesitation would pose greater long-term danger to the institution than decisive, if deeply painful, action. Palace operational teams, having prepared extensively under conditions of strict embargo, moved swiftly once the midnight hour passed and the order became active. By the first light of dawn, the consequences were already visible across multiple official channels. Royal websites displayed updated entries with Meghan's formal styling removed. Ceremonial lists and historical records were comprehensively revised. Diplomatic offices and relevant government departments received new instructions and protocols. Meghan discovered the full scope of the changes not through any personal communication from the king, but indirectly when an assistant opened an official page and observed the complete disappearance of her royal titles. She remained silent for several moments, absorbing the visual confirmation of what Harry had told her. She then requested to examine every altered line and reference in meticulous detail. Correspondence protocols governing formal address, invitations, and official communications were updated immediately. Future ceremonial records no longer included her previous status alongside major state occasions, family processions, or standard palace notices. The deliberate speed of implementation was intended to prevent any outdated references from lingering and to eliminate any perception of hesitation or internal division within the crown. Harry later admitted he had known some form of action was imminent, but had not expected the precise timing or the impersonal manner in which the family learned of the completed changes. The fact that William had received confirmation first only deepened the sense of betrayal and marginalization felt within the Sussex household. Remarkably, amid the broad implementation of changes and revocations, one significant element remained unexpectedly intact: a private invitation extended directly by King Charles, offering Meghan the opportunity for a completely unmediated, confidential, and unrecorded conversation. She studied this remaining invitation with greater attention and longer duration than she had given to any of the newly absent titles. This unexpected opening created a critical moment of choice, whether to pursue continued public confrontation or to explore the possibility of some form of personal closure. For the first time since the crisis had escalated, the subsequent exchange occurred without the usual layers of legal representation, briefing materials, or formal intermediaries. Through a secure private call arranged at the king's request, Charles and Meghan spoke with one another simply as two individuals whose choices had profoundly shaped the destiny of their shared family. No formal titles were used, no ceremonial language was employed. The conversation effectively stripped away institutional trappings, allowing the deeply human realities beneath the constitutional framework to surface more clearly. During their private conversation, Charles spoke first with measured candor. He stated directly that the order was never intended to erase Meghan's marriage, her role as a mother, or her place within Harry's personal life. Its purpose was strictly to end official institutional recognition while preserving the reality of private familial history and bonds. He emphasized that while the Crown held the authority to define and regulate public roles and representations, it possessed no power to rewrite or negate deeply personal relationships existing beyond the palace walls. Meghan responded thoughtfully, acknowledging that regardless of the careful legal distinctions drawn in the document, the broader public narrative would almost inevitably interpret the removal of titles as a clear statement of rejection and unworthiness. Charles then offered an admission he had long resisted articulating. The monarchy as an institution had failed to adequately address and resolve the underlying conflicts before distrust had been allowed to harden into deep and mutual resentment on multiple sides. After a prolonged and meaningful silence, Meghan reached her decision. She would not pursue a formal legal challenge. She would not dedicate the remainder of her life and energy to fighting an institution she had already chosen to step away from. This choice represented not surrender, but a deliberate and conscious decision to end what had become an exhausting and destructive cycle of conflict. Charles exhaled slowly, visible relief mingling with unmistakable regret in his voice. The decree carried substantial and far-reaching implications for the monarchy's operation in the years ahead. It established clearer and more enforceable boundaries between those family members actively engaged in official royal duties and those who had chosen to step away from such responsibilities. The action reinforced the long-standing principle that royal status inherently carried inseparable responsibilities and expectations and could not be retained indefinitely without corresponding service or adherence to institutional guidelines. It also illuminated the complex challenges involved in balancing centuries-old traditions with the intense pressures of contemporary public scrutiny, individual autonomy, and the demands of modern media and social landscapes. In the broader historical context, this midnight order is likely to be remembered as one of the more defining and consequential actions of King Charles III's reign. It demonstrated the difficult, often painful choices required of a modern monarch seeking to preserve the coherence, dignity, and public standing of the institution amid rapidly evolving social expectations and pressures. The decision underscored the practical limits of prolonged ambiguity and the necessity, at certain critical junctures, of establishing firm and unambiguous boundaries, even when doing so exacted a considerable personal and familial cost. For Charles personally, the action carried a burden of enduring regret and sorrow, despite its perceived necessity for the institution he led. Camilla's quiet presence and perspective provided some measure of comfort and reflection during the difficult period. Princess Anne's characteristically direct counsel helped reinforce the rationale behind the decision. Each of the principal figures involved found themselves privately grappling with the inherent tension between their duty to the crown and the emotional realities of family relationships that had been deeply strained by years of unresolved conflict and misunderstanding. Meghan demonstrated a notable degree of personal resolve and composure in her ultimate decision to accept the revocation of her titles and to forego what could have become a prolonged and highly public legal battle. The transition from a figure with formal royal standing to one operating primarily as a private individual demanded significant internal adjustment and recalibration. Her choice reflected a form of maturity shaped by hard-won experience, prioritizing long-term personal peace and closure over the continuation of public confrontation and conflict. Harry found himself in an especially painful and complicated position throughout these events, caught between his fierce loyalty to and defense of his wife and immediate family on one side, and the painful erosion of his relationship with his father and the broader royal institution on the other. The road ahead required him to forge a clearer and more independent sense of personal identity and purpose, one less defined by traditional royal expectations and frameworks. The monarchy itself emerged from this episode with strengthened internal protocols and more clearly delineated expectations regarding roles and responsibilities. Public fascination with the royal family and its internal dynamics showed no signs of diminishing, prompting wider societal conversations about the proper balance between preserving cherished heritage and tradition while adapting effectively to contemporary realities and expectations. In the final analysis, the Midnight Decree represented more than a simple act of severance or revocation of titles. In its deeper implications, it may also have created necessary space for potential future reconciliation on fundamentally new and more clearly defined terms. Beyond the formal loss of status existed the enduring reality of shared history, blood ties, and the persistent possibility of greater understanding over time. The wisdom that often accompanies maturity suggests that even royal families, like others, may eventually discover viable paths toward healing and peace by honestly acknowledging both the painful losses incurred and the connections that ultimately prove more enduring than any constitutional document or public controversy. In this way, the institution and its extended members might yet move forward with greater clarity, purpose, and hard-earned perspective.